Good evening. So Paul has set the stage rather nicely for where I want to begin, which is that personal leadership, particularly from a CEO, is really critical to organisational change towards sustainability. And that right now, there's a dearth of visionary CEOs out there. I challenge you all to think through in your minds the numbers of CEOs like Mick, like Paul, that are out there pushing the vanguard of sustainability. If you get to more than 10, then I'll buy you a drink later. But they're not very many, and think about the thousands of listed companies out there across the world. So on the face of it, not great news, but actually this is where I think we can think about something I would call quiet leadership. So what can you do if your CEO is ambivalent at best, opposed at worst, and there are still some CEOs out there that do not really believe the sustainability agenda will yield profitability? You might have an ambivalent CEO, you might have a very thick marzipan layer, which is what I would describe as those middle managers that might be sitting above you that are really resistant to change. So should you despair if you don't have that visionary CEO, or you're looking up at a very sticky, very yellow marzipan layer? I'd say no, don't despair at all, because this is where I would say quiet leadership really comes into play. And this is really based on my observations, which I did marshal in my head on a beach in Bali, sorry about that, through years of working at Forum for the Future and working with visionary CEOs, but working with the committed category buyers and working with people like yourselves that have a personal conviction for sustainability. So I think that there are probably at least 4 different types of quiet leadership, which I will quickly share with you. There's the just do it anyway type of quiet leadership. So this is characterized by the people that often sidle up to me after a board presentation or out at a public conference who say, I'm really sorry about the CEO or about the board and how hard that particular session was, but you know what, I'm just going to do it anyway. And these are really savvy people who deliberately keep what they're doing under the radar until they can show a win that they can shout about, or until there might be a change in the marzipan layer or at the very top. They use their budgets wisely to try and deliver the change that they think needs to happen. And if they don't have a budget, because often there might not be a budget, they use their influencing skills to influence those around them, to kind of marshal those budgets to get change to happen. And they'll also often seek out someone fairly senior, maybe not on the board, maybe not the CEO, that will give them what someone described to me only before I went on holiday as ground cover. So I was talking to this guy, he's an entrepreneur in a big multinational. They're kind of a bit ambivalent on sustainability. So he's got someone at the top giving him ground cover as he kind of just does it anyway. So that's the first category. The second category is similar but different, and that's the naughty just do it category. So these are the people that have made the decision to do it anyway, but they're willing to take a few more risks and engage in the odd bit of subterfuge. And my best example here, and I've seen this happen a lot, is, oh, that press release, yes, it committed us to a slightly more ambitious target and to trial a new product, a new service. I've seen both those things happen, because once something's out in the public domain, then actually you need to show that you're moving towards taking it seriously. Quite high risk, but I have seen it happen. So that's the naughty just do it anyway approach. Then the third approach is breaking the mold. And this is adopted by those people who recognize that both policies and procedures need to change, and they're willing to be the first to show how this might look. And a really good example here are category managers, who I think hold the key to a lot of change in retail in particular. But I was struck by an example from a category buyer in the US I met a couple of months ago, works for a big US retailer, and decided that it was really important to source 100% sustainable fish, and that would be the first line 100% sustainably sourced. And it was really hard. She had to learn about sustainability, she had to go and meet her suppliers, have a very different conversation with them, and actually she lost a couple of her suppliers because some of them were really resistant and told her sustainable fish doesn't exist, which of course we know is not true. And so breaking the mold for me is all about conviction, charm, and tenacity. You need to keep going. And then the last category that I'd like to share with you tonight is creating the coalitions of the willing. So this is about forming external relationships and groups to create internal change, but it happens by creating external formations. So it might be very hard to suggest a change in a labour practice or working practice in the supply chain if you're the only voice in the corporate. But if actually you can go out and talk to your peers in other organisations, and you could become a group of organisations saying the same thing, then it's actually harder to ignore, particularly if you're saying to your boss, well, actually, our competitor's doing it. So I think these coalitions of the willing can be really powerful at exercising what I would call this quiet leadership. And also for me are probably the area of quiet leadership that can create the most change, because we know that some of the issues that we need to tackle are far too big to tackle alone. So creating these coalitions can actually change not just an individual organisation, but the wider system around it. So within these four approaches, I'd say individuals share common characteristics: personal conviction, passion, imagination and creativity, as Mick talked about, and the ability to influence and persistence, never giving up. And of course, success might be rely on deploying different approaches and all four at the same time, or using them consecutively. And I think these observations from real people, and don't press me for the examples because I'd be betraying some confidences, I think go to prove that American anthropologist Margaret Mead, who was featured on the invite to tonight's event, was right when she said, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that's you here in this room tonight. The sustainability challenges we face, and I won't bore you with how impending they are, how important they are, they're so pressing that we can't afford every listed company to go and find a visionary CEO with a personal commitment. I think it's down to all of us to create the change now, and I offer you quiet leadership as something that you might take away and play with.